Hi, guys. Welcome to From the North. I'm Germania from Montreal right now. So, for the first time, Edu and I are in the same country. Hi, Edu. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm happy that you got to visit my beautiful country. I hope you're liking
I
it.
hate French Canada, so
Mm, let's not get into those deeply politically incorrect conversations that we love to have here in Canada about French Canada. How are you enjoying the weather?
I'm loving Canada. I'm the only person that came from Miami to Canada in the middle of winter, but I'm liking it quite a lot. And we've been away for a few weeks, just dealing with some personal stuff. There was a lot of stuff to do this year, but hopefully, after this week, we'll come back to you guys every week. Of course, that's always our goal. Sometimes life gets in the way, but we are in a compromise here. To bring you guys this show every week. And because we've been away for so long, we have quite a few things to talk about. And we also have a treat for you guys at the end of this episode. We have an interview with Eric Farnsworth. He's an expert on the Western Hemisphere, and he's going to be telling us everything that's going on. But before then, Edu and I are gonna talk some shit. And we're pissed. What else is new?
Yeah. This one's um a little personal to us, as you know, we tend to make everything personal because that's just the type of people that we are, because we're Latinos or whatever. But this one's actually
Also, we are passionate about the issues that we talk about in the show, and we
yeah,
started this show because of our personal history. I
uh,
mean, that's
absolutely, that's a given, and most of you are watching probably share the same or similar stories to us, or the same feelings that we have towards certain situations. This situation in particular has to do with migration. In particular, the situation. We're going to talk first about the situation at the border with the United States and Mexico, and how it is affecting uh, many people that are trying to flee into the United States to seek asylum for a better life. In particular, Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans who according to the numbers, unfortunately, have been the ones most affected by this new development. So, what's going on, Herman?
well, we know that we've had an ongoing immigration crisis in the U.S. But Elo and I want to be very careful with what we're going to say because we stood against Trump, both of us, but that didn't mean that we were fangirling Democrats or Joe Biden or that we're going to shut up about what they do. Absolutely not. I mean, we have promised, both Edu and I, on this show that we're going to put a spotlight on anyone in power who we think is doing the wrong thing. And Joe Biden and his administration are violating international law by the way that they are treating Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Cubans who are coming to the US to seek asylum, which is a basic right that's held up by international law. Let's just start there, right? That's international law. You can show up at any country and say, my where I'm from, it's not safe for me. If I go back, my life is in danger and I need protection. There's nothing illegal about that. And we know that in this specific situation, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Cubans, we know what their situation at home is. So we know that it's dangerous. The Joe Biden administration has said these countries, well, Cuba and Venezuela are dictatorships. So what has come out in the news is absolutely unacceptable. And we had been hearing, Edu, I think I had told you rumors about this, but I didn't have it confirmed. The news is that the Joe Biden administration, because they cannot deport Venezuelans to Venezuela because they don't recognize the Nicolas Maduro regime, they have been deporting Venezuelans to Colombia. I mean, I say it and I don't even know like the logistics of this. Clearly, they have an agreement with the Colombian government that is accepting this. Mind you, Colombia is already faced with the largest number of Venezuelan refugees, is already struggling with this. And now Joe Biden is illegally putting Venezuelans on a plane that has nothing to do with Colombia, and he's sending them there.
It's, as you said. initially, and it's very important that we make the point again and again, so we can be all on the same page. uh, a country has a right to decide whether or not to give asylum to somebody else. Okay, but what they are, I guess, what they have to do according to international law, at the very least, is to hear the asylum seeker make their case. Uh, Come into the country and tell me why is it that you cannot go back home, and if the state or the government or the judge or whoever is representing the immigration institute or whatever it is at that point is the one that, after hearing the evidence, makes a decision and lets the person stay or not.
By the way, Edu knows perfectly about this. I mean, it's in another country, but he has a refugee status, so he knows how this paperwork goes.
This one's especially personal. I am a refugee, like many millions of Venezuelans at this point are refugees. I came to Canada, I sought asylum, and I was granted asylum after the government heard my case. Why I can't go back to Venezuela, like the same reason that 6 million people, 6 millions of Venezuelans cannot go back to their country. What the United States is doing, though, is that they're refusing to hear the asylum seekers' case. They are not considering the evidence. They're not considering what's the reason that they have traveled so far away from their own country. I mean, Venezuela and the United States are pretty far away. It's not a walking distance.
And by the way, a lot of these people are showing up at the Mexico-US border, which wasn't the case in history, especially with Cubans. But now Cubans are also showing up at the US-Mexico border. So imagine that trek. And I mean, I've been to immigration jails, Edu, and I once saw a 90-year-old Cuban lady in one of these immigration jails who had been apprehended at the US-Mexico border. Imagine her trek.
It's inhumane, and it's also very hypocritical from the Biden administration to do what they're doing. One of the first things that the Biden administration did when they took power was grant temporary resident permits to Venezuelans who were already in the United States, because they deemed that Venezuela, it's a country that's too dangerous just to send them back. Many countries have done the same, including Canada and some other countries in Europe, some other countries in Latin America. Because it's known that the situation in Venezuela is terrible. Like, you don't have to look too far, just look at the numbers. There's a reason 6 million people out of 30 million have left the country, a country that's not going through war, a country that's not going through a civil war or any type of armed conflict on a major scale. It's people that can't do it. They can't keep living under the conditions that they are being forced to live in by regimes such as the Venezuelan regimes.
And that's so, because I feel a lot of people see immigration, particularly the type of immigration that comes to the US, they see it as an economic migration type of thing, you know? And the reality is that most of the people showing up at the US-Mexico border are running from left-wing dictatorships. That's the inconvenient truth of the migration of the Western Hemisphere.
And it shouldn't be a politicized topic. Like, it shouldn't matter if you're fleeing from a left-wing dictatorship, if you're fleeing from a right-wing dictatorship, or if you're fleeing for whatever the heck's going on in Venezuela at the moment. It's a dictatorship. Your life is in peril. Like, if the government doesn't kill you for speaking your mind out, they're gonna starve you to death. They're gonna disappear you. They're gonna kidnap you, because that's what these governments do, and that's why so many of us have left our country. No one wants to leave their country. There's PSA for everyone who's anti-migration. No one wants to leave their country, or I will say most people don't want to leave their country.
There is a different type of immigration, and I think most people, at least the ones I come across to in the US, they when they think of an immigrant, they think of a Central American immigrant who wants to go to the US to live the American dream and have a better job, have a better life. This is not the type of migration that we are seeing.
This is survival.
Yeah, it's a different type of migration.
It's a different type of migration. There's a lot of stake here, and the very least that the government of the United States should do, and following, the liberal Democrat kind of, playbook that they should be following, the very least that they should do, it's listen to the asylum seekers, listen to their case, and then make a
But what
decision.
about Edu? Let's talk about it. When they were campaigning against Trump, one of their big promises and attacks against Trump was how he treated immigrants. And that was one of our arguments of why we were against Trump.
And now you have it.
In Mexico, let's talk about, because Trump started the Remain in Mexico policy, which, as Edu said, was okay, we'll hear your asylum case, we'll take your asylum case in the US, but while we decide, you have to stay in Mexico. Again, people that they're not Mexicans. This is Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, people from other countries. Biden first stopped that policy, the Remain in Mexico policy. And then late last year, he re-established it. Just like he, well, I'm not going to say it because we're not sure about the specific policy, but basically, the Biden administration is following the Trump line on immigration, and that is not what they sold us.
That's not only not what they sold us, and we're going back to the point, is hypocritical, but even if, you know, that was their point all along, right? That's still not okay. And that's the reason why we so emphatically criticize right-wing governments, anti-migration governments, when they openly have these kind of policies, because this policy shouldn't be in place to begin with. But when supposedly
Obama was the what is it that they call him? The deportationer in chief?
He was, like, by the numbers, Obama deported an insanely amount of people. Trump did the same.
We have different opinions on this. Edu is like an open borders hippie. I'm not. But I think, again, and that's why when you are running from, like, political asylum is very specific. And that's an international law. So that's why I'm like focused on it.
It is.
You know? And especially when we're sanctioning Venezuela. We are for sanctions, but you're gonna keep squishing, and then you're gonna deport people to Colombia?
Not only that, but like you can tell that this is, you know, a planned effort to call Venezuelans migration into the United States, because it's not the first thing that they've done. A couple months before, or I believe it wasn't that long ago actually, the United States government convinced the Mexican government to start asking for tourist visas for Venezuelans to come into Mexico. Something that was not the case. I don't believe it's never been the case between Mexico and Venezuela. It is extremely rare to see that between Latin American countries. We have seen it happen, especially with Venezuelans in countries such as Chile, Peru. I believe Ecuador has some kind of visa as well, but now Mexico has it as well, and it's not
to be an anti-imperialist, Edu. He's doing Biden's dirty work.
Again, exactly. It's again the hypocrisy of these governments. Two governments that are supposed to be liberal, and the Mexico government that's not only supposed to be liberal, but supposed to be anti-imperialist, Marxist, socialist, whatever they want to call themselves, for the people or whatever, but they are complying with this migration policy that was pressured by the United States government. So it's not like it's an accident. It's not like it's a bureaucaucracy thing. It's
an ongoing campaign.
It's a campaign, yeah.
Yeah, and this is what brings us, and we've been serious, but we're about to get even more serious. There is a crisis at the US-Mexico border. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but like we said, it's not your typical situation that you see at the US-Mexico border. It's people who are from countries far away somehow getting there. And again, imagine that trek, and I bring it up again because a few weeks ago, a 7-year-old Venezuelan girl drowned while trying to cross the Rio Grande with her mom. So this is, I mean...
This
is a situation in the US-Mexico border. And do you think imagine like what it has to take for a mother to take that risk with her 7-year-old girl?
To travel all the way to Mexico and try to cross El Rio Grande to get into the United States, not knowing that what's likely going to happen is that once they cross their border, if they make it alive, they're probably going to be deported to a third country.
Imagine that. You're risking your life, and then you could be deported to Colombia, not even to your own country.
And I think one of the most concerning things here, besides the human rights that are being violated, which is always the main thing that we should always have in mind, it's also how really no one's talking about it. Nobody is. You know, you're not gonna see this in the media, and I hate to be the Ben Shapiro type of guy, the AOC type of guy saying the mainstream media won't say anything about it, but in this particular case, it is true. Other than a few articles spread, you know, here and there, I actually did find out about the deportation of Venezuelans to Colombia via CNN.
But this is how they get you, because then they say, well, you say no one is talking about it, but you found out about it through the media. Well, yes, props this investigative journalism that we found out about the deportations. But what we mean is that there's no focus on it. There's no repetition, there's no blowing up of the news. I can assure you, if a few details about this Biden administration deporting people to countries that aren't theirs were different, this would be a story that would be blowing up. I have a feeling if it was the Trump administration instead, this would be a story that would be blowing up.
It would probably do, and as it should be. But the fact that it's not, it's concerning. And I guess that takes us to the other point, still talking about the Venezuelan migrants. And maybe for those of you who are not Venezuelans or are not familiar with the situation, why would someone take the risk of going all the way to Mexico to cross the border to the United States? Well, what just happened between Venezuela and Trinidad Tobago, it's kind of a good, however grimful example of why people will take the risk to go to the United States.
Well, first I want to say, Edo, as well, because you and I always get the tankies saying that we are, the rich Venezuelans, we're white. Honestly, I left in a privileged way. Edu, not so much as me, he's actually a refugee. But these people are the most vulnerable, the ones that are leaving now, the ones that are walking through countries to Mexico. So that's the context of what Edu is saying.
The ones that are taking boats to flee Venezuela and try to make it to Trinidad, which is a country that you might have heard of. It's right beside Venezuela. So like Cubans have been doing since the 60s, when they, get on their rafts and try to make it all the way to the States or any country in the Americas. Venezuelans have reached that point. Those that are not crossing the border into Colombia or trying to push it far down south, those who do not have enough resources to pay for a plane ticket to a country that might hear their asylum case, they are taking this risk. They are taking their boats. And what just recently happened, it's a boat of Venezuelans traveling to Trinidad, was shot at by the Trinitarian security forces. And in self-defense, though, should be clear that a boat of poor migrants shouldn't pose a threat to anyone, really. They shot at the boat and they kill a girl in her mother's arms.
A 9-month-old baby.
A 9-month-old baby. If this is a horrible thing, like it's incredibly horrible. This is something that's alarming at an international scale, or it should be at least.
So many. I mean, that's a grotesque violation of a grotesque violation of international law. Shooting at migrants,
shooting a baby on a boat that's trying to seek asylum to get a better life. That it's disgusting. But what's also disgusting is that, again, no one's talking about it. No, like, for less than this, they have made a scene and they have gone nuts on the media for less than this when stuff like this happens in the Mediterranean with African refugees, as it should be, because this shit shouldn't happen to anyone. It shouldn't happen to Venezuelans, shouldn't happen to Syrians, shouldn't happen to Africans, but it does happen. And when it happens in the Mediterranean, when it happens in Turkey, when it happens in the Middle East, it seems that people are paying more attention. But when a baby girl is shot and killed by the military of another government to prevent them from coming into the country and seek asylum, and no one's talking about it, it's extremely, extremely concerning. A big part of the reason that we have this show is because we have felt for a while now that the things that are going on specifically in countries such as Venezuela, such as Cuba, such as Nicaragua, are things that are horrible that should be talked about, and people are not talking about it. And it seems that as we keep recording, as we're getting close to our first anniversary on this show, the situation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So our call is for people to talk about this, to actually have these conversations, and to actually put pressure on their own governments from stopping this horrible, inhumane treatment of migrants that is going on, particularly with Venezuelans at the moment. That's
Right.
our call.
Everyone's human rights matter. I mean, and I'm going to be even more blunt about it as usual. We know why the Syrian crisis was in our TVs for years, and it was because those people were coming to Western Europe. So then, you know, if it's the white men, then it has to be on the news. But what do they care what's going on in a little island full of brown and black people called Trinidad, right?
What do they care that, you know, Venezuelans are drowning in Texas? What do they care that, you know, Venezuelans are being shot at and persecuted in Peru and Ecuador?
Yes, Edu, and this is a fact. If they are running away from a government system that so many want to insist it's still cool in the first world, the story is not convenient. It's just a story that doesn't fit what the accepted narrative is, and no one wants to touch it. And that's why Edu and I, as he said, felt strongly to create this show. But I will ask anyone who listens and anyone who has felt like their people's crisis doesn't matter, talk about it. Be the inconvenient person. Sit at a bar, and when they start talking about the things that CNN allows us to talk about, ask him, oh, actually, did you hear about this? And tell people. If that's all we can do to spread our tragedy and to get people to look, that's what we should be doing.
That's exactly is. It's we may not, you know, we are not being hurt now, but we can get there, and the way to do it is to have these conversations. We, as people who love democracy, who love freedom, who love human rights, these are the kind of things that we should be advocating for. Well, in this case, against what governments such as the Biden administration and the Trinitarian government are doing, and the way that they're treating people that are just frankly fleeing for their lives.
Right. This also doesn't fit the narrative that only the white men is. Of course, like, who's going to want to tell the story of the Trinidadian government being completely violators of human rights to Venezuelan migrants, right? That's just not that sexy. It's not the white men, but it happens.
It happens.
And that reminds me, Edu, this is actually a perfect thread, because Venezuelans, Cubans, Nicaraguans, anyone who's a victim of a far leftist movement has known for a while that figures like Glenn Greenwald, AOC, Ben and Jerry, ice cream, but if you are not a direct victim of a leftist dictatorship, and in the first world, sadly, you probably thought these were progressive heroes. Like, how cool the Ben and Jerry guys were supporting Bernie Sanders. But now that they're being so obvious about carrying Putin's water, now the progressives are waking up and they're like, oh, no. Now they're right wing because they agree with Tucker Carlson. No, honey, they're the far left, and they just crossed the horseshoe to the Fox News right.
To give you guys context, if you don't know, Ben and Jerry is an ice cream brand in America, and you know it's a thing now that brands tend to have personalities on social media. Some of them are funny, some of them are politically active, some of them, you know, do their activism for the right, some of them do their activism for the left. But it's gotten to a point where, you know, I'll just call it late stage social media, because it's just funny to like say what I'm about to say. But an ice cream company posted a very, very viral tweet defending Russia going into Ukraine and standing against, you know, the world supporting Ukraine. An ice cream company an ice cream company, and I.
It's worse, Edu. That ice cream company had the same opinion as many Congress people, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So the same opinion on the topic, which was, of course, we, the US, are threatening Putin by even having this conversation.
And
I'm sorry, but in 1941, these people would literally be saying the US is provoking Japan. I'm sure there were characters at the time, the anti-war crew saying that we were being mean to Japan.
we can solve Pearl Harbor diplomatically. Like, we shouldn't exhaust.
They would still be saying we shouldn't start a war. Like, just completely. They probably still.
Who started the war? Did the United States send 200,000 troops to the Ukrainian-Russia border? No.
Because they would claim that the US started the war by assisting England. So we deserve Pearl Harbor.
What's going on, guys? Like I hate to say it, but we truly live in the post-truth era of journalism, at least, and political discourse in North America. And that's the prime example. Like, what's going on in Ukraine, it's just bread and butter. It's not that difficult. Russia is threatening. Russia wants to tell Ukraine what to do with their foreign policy. Ukraine says, no, we are our own sovereign nation and we're going to take the decisions that we want to take. And then Russia is threatening invasion.
Because saying itself is a threat to Putin, as a lot of people say. Well, the Ukrainians want democracy. That's a threat.
Like I get it. I get it. Like, if you don't have a lot of political experience outside of what's going on in your own turf, and you're an American or you're a Canadian, or
supporting your own personal dictator as we do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't hate Putin as much as we do, because we've been colonized by the Russians, if you haven't heard. But it's a cool thing to say. You don't like the government. No one's gonna tell you, oh, you're a nerd because you don't like the government. That's a cool thing to say. You know what? Oh, I don't like this gun. I don't like my country. I don't like my government. I'm a rebel, whatever.
Everyone wants to go for the strong guy, and people still perceive the US as the strong guy. So what? The coolest thing for a university student is to say, I hate the US. That's like, I mean,
it's a fad. And you know what? I get it. There are a lot of things to hate, but when it gets to the point where you hate the West or America or NATO so much,
that you want Putin to be daddy, like the president of Argentina, we have to mention that. This is on the same thread. It's basically a college tanky that's president of Argentina that met with Putin and said, I am tired of the Yankees and the US being our boss. I don't want Argentina to be dependent on the US anymore. So instead, he asked Putin to be daddy.
It's like, you guys, it's like we have completely ignored all the things that Russia has done and continues to do in their own borders and outside of their borders since Putin took power so many years ago, like a dictator. And I just can't believe we're at that point. Where we're actually defending authoritarian despots, kleptocrats, maniacs like Putin or Xi Jinping just because they're not the United States. So again, like, my call, I guess, is it's okay to be anti-imperialist. It is okay to be critical of your country. You should be critical of your country, but
anti-imperialist, but be a real one then.
For fuck's sake, do not support Russia. I can't believe I have to say this. Do not support Russian imperialism. That is not cool. That is not based. That's horrible. You're a horrible human being.
Again, I already knew Ben and Jerry were tankies because they were like Bernie Sanders' number one supporters. But no one believed me until they said the same thing as Tucker Carlson. So I
can't articulate anything because the whole situation is so stupid that I just can't begin to explain why is it stupid.
The memes with the Ben and Jerry thing were prime. Like, the memes where it's like the one that I sent you that we'll put it here as our cover thing. was like, okay, everyone agrees, the Western democracies agree we have to protect Ukraine. And then someone's like, wait, has anyone asked Ben and Jerry?
What they think about it? Their new flavor, appeasement. Great quality memes. Great quality memes. Well, guys, that's been pretty much it. We wanted to make this episode short. We wanted to really, get it out of our system and talk about the border situation and the treatment again of Venezuelans in borders in different countries. We wanted to make our call for what we believe is right, which are human rights, and I think everyone can agree with that. And
against the people that we support as well. Edu, I've had a bunch in my DMs, asking me to comment on Biden doing this or Biden doing other things. I am not a Biden stan, people. I just was against Trump, but I'm a journalist and I will talk shit about anyone in power. So you don't got to worry about that, believe me.
And I don't even care. I live in Canada. So again, like we said, we're not gonna pretend that one government is doing everything right, or one government is doing anything wrong. When something's done right, we say it. When something's done wrong, we say it. It just so happened that Donald Trump was pretty bad. So we were hitting him hard a lot, but dude kind of deserves it.
And by the way, the reason I took a position on that election, ideally I wouldn't do that if it wasn't a matter of preserving democracy. I'm not someone to, like, a lot of people think I literally worked for his campaign. Absolutely not. I've never worked in politics in my entire life. I just said, and I actually didn't tell people vote for Biden. I just spoke against Trump. Like, that was something that was important for me to do, and I don't regret it. And now I will keep an eye out on the one that's in power now. And then when the next one comes, I'll do that again.
We'll do the same. And I feel something that gets lost a lot in this discussion about Biden supporters versus Trump supporters is that people don't remember how consequential the last election was just by the number of people that voted. And the thing that kind of differentiates Republican voters today and how they were 2 years ago and Democrat voters is that most Democrat voters were not in love with Joe Biden. Even people who voted for Biden in the primaries were not in love with him. They just saw Biden as the guy who could unite the party and beat Donald Trump like he did. In the Republican caucus, and Republican electorate, it's a completely different story. It seems that the Republican Party has become the party of Donald Trump, which is
more lost to the extremes. And that's something we talk about all the time. Like, yes, the Democratic Party has its extremes, but they're not ruling and running shit the way in the Republican Party, it seems the extremes are running shit.
And that's going to be an interesting conversation. There's a new schism going on or schism, I don't know how to pronounce it, on the Republican caucus right now between some members of the Republican Party, including Mike Pence, including Adam Kissinger, including Mitch McConnell recently, kind of pushing back against Donald Trump. And that's good because that's the type of things that we like. Because for us,
Mitch McConnell has failed so many times. Like, he's not I don't trust it.
I don't trust the guy, but at least he's speaking out against Trump. And
what Pence said, it was the wrong thing for Trump to want to, like, that is what we would expect. But sadly, we have seen even, the Republicans who try to speak against Trump, Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former vice president, they censored her for voting to impeach Trump and for looking into January 6th.
Same like Representative Kissinger. Him and Cheney were both ousted or banned from going to the RNC, the Republican National Convention. And this is actually the reason why Mitch McConnell came out, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, actually criticizing, condemning the RNC decision to censor them.
That is really good. I had missed that.
And no, he did. And he actually went back on the same position as...
Let's hope he goes on that path. Like, again, for the well-being of all of us, we need a healthy Republican Party.
Yes, and looking towards November of this year when we're gonna have midterm elections, how are the Republicans gonna run? Are they gonna run as the conservatives? Are they gonna run as the Trump Party? And I
think they'll run as anti-Biden, and that's the sad thing about being in power. It's way easy to campaign against power.
So that's how Biden got elected.
Yeah, yeah,
No
yeah. And
one voted for Biden. Everyone voted against Trump.
exactly. No, I think the midterms are going to be a bloodbath, but we'll definitely be talking about this on the show. And now enjoy our interview with Eric Farnsworth. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us again from the North. This is your second time here. Eric is an expert on the Western Hemisphere, and he's with America Society and Council of the Americas. And he just has an article that I'm going to share below here at the National Interest. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Eric, how are you doing?
Doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me on again. I guess that means I didn't screw up too badly the first time.
Absolutely not. You, as I always say, you're one of the few first worlders that has a nuanced idea of what's going on in Latin America. So I'm a little biased that I choose to display you. So Eric, this year we started off this show kind of talking about how the US and the Western democratic countries seem to become more isolated, less interested in meddling in any way in international affairs, particularly in Latin America. And that's particularly the region you look at. But of course, as we're speaking right now, we're expecting Putin to continue to invade the Ukraine any moment now, according to experts. So clearly there are two powers that are moving forward, Russia and China. And then there's the US kind of focusing, it seems to me, on internal affairs and or culture wars and what shade color Hispanics are and things like that. So let's get right down to it, Eric. It's the beginning of the year. In your article, you lay out, and oh, by the way, I wanted to mention this because you start saying that the first Summit of the Americas was in '94 in Miami, and I was there as a baby. I was born that year, and my mom is a journalist, and she took me because she had to cover it. So I'm gonna put the picture here so everyone can see it. And this year, it's going to happen again. So you kind of lay out how things have changed, moved forward or not. So what's going on, Eric? Why has the U.S. pulled away from not only the region, but the world, it seems?
Well, there's a lot there for sure. And thanks again for having me on. But you're exactly right. Let's start with the Summit of the Americas first. The first one was hosted by the U.S. in Miami in 1994. And I was there too. If you see this poster over my shoulder, that's actually a street poster from Miami from 1994. And I was there. I was older than you were, but still early in my career. And we've seen some dramatic changes between then and now. And the reason why I'm raising that is because the White House has just announced just days ago that the next Summit of the Americas will be hosted in June in Los Angeles. And so it's a really interesting point of comparison. Where is the hemisphere today versus where was it in 1994? And what's the comparison? And have we gained ground on democracy or have we lost ground? And I think a lot of that goes to the heart of some of the things you were also just mentioning, and that's the role of the United States globally. And, you know, coming out of World War II and for the immediate post-war era, there was a bipartisan consensus that the United States needed to be engaged around the world. Clearly, that was in the Cold War timeframe, but also it was in terms of emerging markets and everything else. That the United States had a role to play, and it was an important strategic role. And no matter you know what party you were in, you basically thought that to a greater or lesser extent, the United States needed to be engaged abroad. What we see today is that there's actually a bipartisan consensus that the United States has been overstretched abroad, and that people need to come back and focus on so many other things, including some of the challenges to our own democracy that have clearly been on display over the past year and more. And so we have some deep domestic issues we have to resolve too. But the point that I'm making is that, you know, as the United States pulls back, Afghanistan was probably the best example last year, but there are others that you could also reference. As the United States pulls back, nature does not allow for a vacuum to exist much longer. And the question is, who goes into that vacuum? And so that was really the basis of my article that you generously referenced. You know, where are we between summits of the Americas? And if the United States is not meaningfully engaged in the Western Hemisphere, somebody else will be. And so it's a bit of a challenge for the U.S. to re-engage in a meaningful way.
Right, and that's what a lot of people seem to miss, that if there is an empty space, someone will fill it. I think it's shocking and sad how you say that in 94 there was one dictator in the region, Castro, and now we have three, and we can argue they are sort of from the same cancer. We can argue that the Cuban dictatorship has led to the other two. So something else you mentioned in your article I was shocked by, and I cannot believe that we don't have ambassadors in places like Argentina and Brazil, Eric. Like, are we sure? I'm almost like, is that true? How can it be?
Well, that's a good question. How can it be? There has been some progress on that front since I wrote the article. The U.S. has confirmed an ambassador for Argentina, but we still don't have an ambassador in Brazil. That position is open for a year now. And let me give you an even worse example. Chile has just gone through a very important election. They're going through a constitutional reform effort. You know, the United States has not had an ambassador in Santiago de Chile for 4 years. So it's a bipartisan failing. It has nothing to do with Chile or the Chilean people. It has everything to do with the fact that our own political process is so messed up. And you could go down the line. There are other very important countries, not just in Latin America, frankly, in the Caribbean, but elsewhere around the world, where the U.S. simply has no presence at that level. And, you know, there is business connectivity, there is media connectivity, there's people to people, but it really, I mean, you can't replace an ambassador. An ambassador matters. And that's something that we just have to do better on.
But it just goes to show a lack of thought, no? Like, I mean, if you're a Latin American president and you're looking for a strong ally, that's not a good sign. But going back to what you were saying that we always talk about in this show, that Americans, and I think first worlders at large, seem to believe that the US doesn't need to be out there almost the phrase promotion of democracy has sort of become like a dirty phrase. Like when I say that to my liberal friends, I feel like I'm like a Trump supporter, far right, even though Trump is an isolationist himself. But you know, people have kind of, they want to talk, I always say they want to talk about, you know, the US and the CIA being involved in propping up Pinochet, and not about what's going on right now, that we have three dictatorships in the Americas supported by powers such like Iran and Russia. So why, Eric?
Well, it's a really important question, and we don't probably have enough time to fully explore it. But, you know, once the Cold War ended, and again, this is going back 30 years now, the absence of an external threat really changed the desire for a lot of people in the US, particularly, frankly, to spend money and resources on fighting a threat that was no longer perceived as relevant. Of course, then you had 9/11, and it was the war on terror. And now with the rise of China, you see China is actively engaged around the world. But during that time, people did not spend enough time and effort standing for democracy. You probably remember, at least from your academic studies, you know, people were writing books about the so-called end of history, right? Democracy has prevailed. You know, communism is dead, right? And of course, it was ludicrous, but that was the impression. We won the Cold War, right? And so we did not continue to invest in democracy and the importance of democratic institutions. And so as those countries, and in some cases, you know, became challenged, whether it was economically, or you had strongmen like Chavez in Venezuela, or Assad in Syria, or Erdogan in Turkey, or other places, the institutions were not strong enough to resist them. And now you layer on top of that the entrance, particularly of China, into the game, which is able to really make common cause with anti-democrats around the world, and you have a toxic mix. Plus, again, as we've already discussed, the U.S. looking more inward. So, you know, it's really tragic, though, to hear people say, you know, you shouldn't support democracy, or somehow the United States democracy promotion effort is cynically mandated or something like this. The reality is, and I've been in government, and I've been outside of government now, of course, as well. But the reality is there is a genuine desire to promote democratic institutions around the world. It doesn't mean it's perfectly done. It doesn't mean it's always successful. It doesn't mean there aren't other interests there. But, you know, the cynicism about democracy, what has happened, if I can say, is that it has limited the U.S. desire to be engaged in these ways abroad. And then again, it's not like the US goes away and then some magical democracy promotion institution or country just magically fills the space. There is nothing else. What, the United Nations, the OAS? I mean, give me a break. So who fills that space? Well, Russia and China and
Let's talk about
authoritarian
that,
countries
Eric,
around the world.
because right now people are, the tankies of always, the first world Latin American experts of always, saying that Russia isn't really a threat, that those of us who say this are warmongers and we want to attack Putin. So tell me a little bit about what China and Russia are doing, have done, and want to do in Latin America.
Well, you have to divide, I think, several categories. One category is people who are literally on the payroll of various governments. And that includes some media institutions, and it includes some, that are funded by, like Russia Today, obviously, or, Venezuelan, or, Telesur, or what have you. Those are state-based broadcasting. But then you have other individuals who, may be, receiving some sort of accommodation from some of those governments. It's awfully hard to tell who's actively doing that. But having said that, then there are a lot of people who, it's just a cool thing to say, right? To be anti-U.S., to be anti-American, as Lenin might say, they're useful idiots, right? They're people who would, wear Che Guevara T-shirts and, talk about U.S. imperialism. I mean, goodness knows, you're from Venezuela, your family's from Venezuela. Who's the worst imperialist in Venezuelan history? It's Cuba. Right? And Cuba's taken over the country, and yet people are, saying Che Guevara, anti-imperialism. Give me a break. I mean, it's so.
It is a communication.
Ironic.
It feels like we have lost the communications battle on this issue somehow, and it's crazy to me because for how long was the U.S. the absolute empire, in entertainment, arts, music, and somehow we have lost the cultural war on that topic.
I think a lot of people still value the United States. I think the United States we've lost confidence in ourselves. I mean, if you talk to many people, whether it's in the academic world or even just in political world, I'm in Washington, of course, and the first response is, yeah, well, we're not so great ourselves. So what gives us the right to try to help other people, with democracy, not to say impose it, because we could never do that, and we don't try that, but, how do you encourage other people when you yourself, your own house isn't in order?
Especially now, right? We're kind of a mess.
Well, I think that's a fair criticism as far as it goes, but you can take it too far. I mean, of course, we're not perfect. We've never claimed to be perfect. I think January 6th, a year ago, 2021, ripped the scab off and really showed that we have deeper faults perhaps than we were willing to admit. But we certainly recognize that. Having said that, I mean, if that means that the United States is going to lose its voice globally in terms of democracy promotion, again, it might be something that we think is, cool or sexy from the U.S. perspective. But at the end of the day, the people who are losing are the people globally who will have to be living under authoritarian, toxic, human rights abusing regimes.
But also eventually us now. And we try to tell people, why should you care about, dictatorships in other countries? Yes, it starts far, far away, but they are advancing. Like our own freedom, even in the States, is threatened by these movements that are getting closer and closer.
Well, and, the countries, for example, again, Venezuela, I hate to keep coming back, but you and I both know the story there very, very well. Venezuela is a dictatorship, but, it's not, the problem is, well, one of the problems is the challenges of Venezuela don't remain within the Venezuelan territory.
Right.
You have over 5 million Venezuelans outside of the country as refugees. And where are they going? I mean, they're going to Colombia, they're going to Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Chile.
This week, and I want to bring this up because it's, again, how it hits us in the States. A 7-year-old girl, Venezuelan girl, drowned in the Rio Grande trying to cross with her mother this week. This is happening weekly.
It's absolutely horrible. And so, they say, why should we care? Well, first of all, hopefully we all have a humanitarian instinct. But if we want to be real politique on this and forget about humanitarian instinct, why should we care? We should care because Venezuelan refugees are undermining democracies and friendly, governments around the region. and Venezuelan citizens are literally showing up on U.S. borders seeking asylum and seeking help. And, again, as a humanitarian instinct, we should want to help people who need help, and I strongly support that. But even that issue aside, this is having a dramatic impact on broader U.S. interests across the Western Hemisphere. So, when you have a collapsing society, those issues don't just stay in that country, they overwhelm some of the neighbors. And look, the neighbors aren't in necessarily great shape either. They don't have the capacity to absorb millions of Venezuelan citizens or millions of Nicaraguans or Cuban boat people or what have you. You look at a country like Haiti, right? Haiti's a country that's literally in full-scale collapse. Doesn't have a functioning government, is just a country in desperate need of assistance, and that's a country where, yeah, we should care about the state of democracy, because a collapsing society means that you're going to start seeing desperate Haitians, for example, seeking asylum and seeking help elsewhere, and that's exactly what happens. And it's not just the United States, Dominican Republic, other islands in the Caribbean, etc. Those are just a couple examples. You could take Syria, you could take other countries around the world. It's real, and we do have an interest in helping those situations.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your expertise on the region and for caring about it, because everyone's just ignoring Latin America always. So thank you so much for joining us from the north, and please come back soon.
Be happy to do it, and get back to this country safely.
Thanks.